On the morning of April 7, 1945, a grim, crimson dawn broke over the beleaguered city of Tokyo. Inside the confining cockpit of his Ki-84 Hate fighter, the undisputed apex of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force's arsenal, Captain Masao Suinaga meticulously adjusted his worn leather flight gloves. At Chofu Airfield, situated 20 miles west of the capital, the veteran pilot registered the deep, familiar vibration, another inexorable wave of American B-29 superfortresses approaching from the south. Yet, this morning carried a chilling difference. Suinaga's radio suddenly erupted with fractured, confused transmissions from ground control. Reports of unknown, silver enemy fighters rapidly approaching, not from the established B-29 routes, but from the southeast. The 28-year-old squadron commander furrowed his brow. The vector was tactically impossible. The nearest American fighter base, Saipan, lay over 600 miles distant, a range far exceeding the operational radius of any escort fighter he had ever encountered. For 3 years, Suinaga had commanded missions, facing the full spectrum of Allied air power. P-38 Lightnings over the Philippines, F-6F Hellcats during carrier raids, and the formidable F-4U Corsairs near Okinawa. But those engagements had occurred near enemy bases or naval task forces. Here, over the very heart of the Japanese home islands, the Imperial fighters had always maintained unchallenged supremacy. The illusion of safety shattered when his ground crew chief, Sergeant Yamamoto, pounded frantically on the fuselage side. "Captain, emergency scramble. Unknown fighters approaching." The radio crackled with a chilling announcement. Unidentified aircraft approaching Tokyo from the south. For Captain Suinaga, this transmission instantly translated into a terrifying geographical puzzle, forcing him to rapidly calculate operational distances in his mind. The Americans had secured Yuma Island 5 weeks prior, yet that crucial staging point remained over 650 miles distant. Under the rigid doctrines of 1944 aerial combat, this operational radius was considered a feat of aerodynamic impossibility for any conventional fighter aircraft. As the twin engines of his Nakajima Ki-45 coughed violently before catching, Suinaga's gaze locked onto the horizon. He caught a flash of brilliant silver glinting in the pale morning light. Not the expected, dark silhouettes of American carrier-based planes, but a sleek, unfamiliar shape that defied contemporary engineering logic. All units scrambled immediately. The urgent, strained command cut through his headphones. Unidentified fighters confirmed over central Tokyo. A cold knot tightened in Suinaga's stomach as his K-84 Hate raced down the concrete runway. In 3 years of relentless combat, he had never detected such raw, paralyzing panic emanating from ground control. As he lifted off the ground and climbed toward the required 15,000 feet, one terrifying question dominated his thoughts. How, precisely, had American fighters traversed a vast ocean expanse to reach the Imperial capital? Captain Suinaga, like every pilot in the Imperial Japanese Air Force, stood at the precipice of profound tactical revolution. He was about to witness the shattering of established limits concerning range, endurance, and the very design parameters of long-range escort aircraft. The silver aircraft streaking toward the heart of Japan represented a technological leap that rendered all previous assumptions obsolete. The appearance of the specific aircraft over the Japanese capital represented far more than just a new enemy fighter. It was a definitive death knell for Japanese air superiority over their own homeland. The era of the P-51 Mustangs' unprecedentedly long-range escort missions had irrevocably begun. To truly comprehend the profound professional shock coursing through the mind of a pilot like Captain Suinaga in April 1945, one must grasp the fundamental, immutable laws of aerial warfare that Japanese fighter design had always obeyed. For every fighter aircraft they had ever encountered, the equation remained cruelly simple. Greater operational range necessitated a corresponding sacrifice in speed or protective performance. More internal fuel meant fewer weapons, or worse, pilots limping home as vulnerable targets on depleted tanks. The Japanese themselves had mastered this harsh arithmetic. Their legendary A-6M00 achieved its famous vast range only by ruthlessly sacrificing essential elements like pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural resilience. The result was a formidable fighter that could indeed traverse enormous distances, but which, tragically, earned the nickname the Flying Coffin when American guns found their mark, often disintegrating from a single well-placed burst. Historically, American fighters embodied the exact opposite design philosophy: powerful, heavily armed, and exceptionally well-protected, yet severely confined to short-range combat radii. The durable, stubby P-47 Thunderbolt, packing 8.50 caliber machine guns, could absorb punishment that would instantly destroy a Zero, but its combat radius barely exceeded 300 miles. While the twin-engine P-38 Lightning offered superior range, it still demanded forward operating bases relatively close to its intended targets. This fundamental geographical and technological limitation had long afforded Japanese home defense a critical, almost insurmountable advantage. Since American escort fighters lacked the necessary range to reach the Japanese mainland, the Imperial Empire's veteran airmen were free to concentrate their lethal efforts solely on the vulnerable, unescorted formations of high-flying B-29 Superfortress bombers. Every crew aboard a B-29 flying deep into Japanese airspace understood the chilling finality of isolation once they crossed the Pacific coastline. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe, a hardened ace scrambling from Haneda Airfield in his formidable Kawasaki Ki-61 High-End Tony, had meticulously constructed his entire tactical doctrine upon this verifiable weakness. The Americans come in fat and slow, he had instructed his wingmen just 48 hours prior. Their fighters are forced to turn back at the coast. That is precisely when we deliver the fatal blow. At 0647 hours, climbing steadily through 12,000 feet in a tight formation alongside 5 other Japanese interceptors, Watanabe was the first to spot the incoming raid. He saw a formation of sleek silver aircraft plummeting toward the critical Nakajima Aircraft Factory complex at Musashino. Yet, a chilling anomaly registered instantly in his mind. These were not the expected heavy bombers. They were swift, single-engine fighters, maneuvering with the aggressive, unapologetic confidence of aircraft operating directly from a nearby home base. "Control, this is Lightning 3, Watanabe urgently radioed, using his designated call sign. "I count 15 no, 20 single-engine fighters attacking the Musashino plant. Type unknown." The operational radio channels immediately erupted into a chaotic, confused torrent of chatter. Japanese pilots stationed across the entire Tokyo area were frantically reporting the same strategically impossible sight: American fighters, penetrating the sacred airspace, operating with devastating impunity directly over the beating heart of Japan. Japanese air defenses were confronted by a new, unsettling reality. American fighters were conducting precision attack missions deep within the home islands, hundreds of miles from any established forward base. Leading the elite 103rd Centi from Kosa Airfield, Captain Tamiro Ogawa was a seasoned veteran, credited with 25 aerial victories earned over the Philippines, Okinawa, and dozens of desperate home defense sorties. As he closed to 1,000 yards on a formation of mysterious silver fighters, a chilling realization dawned. He was facing an entirely new class of aerial opponent. The aircraft possessed a deadly aesthetic, all clean, purposeful lines, their elliptical wings reminiscent of the British Spitfire, but featuring a longer, distinctly aggressive nose. Most unsettling of all, they carried large external fuel tanks beneath their wings. Yet these fighters were maneuvered with the aggressive energy of aircraft at the beginning of a sortie, not the fuel-starved lethargy of a mission's end. Impossible? Ogawa might have muttered into his oxygen mask. Those crucial drop tanks should have been discarded long ago. Unbeknownst to Ogawa, he was witnessing the culmination of American industrial and technological prowess. The formidable P-51 Mustang, a strategic marriage between North American aviation's airframe and the optimized British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. This configuration achieved impossible operational range. These silver aircraft had already traversed over 675 miles from their forward base on Iwo Jima, fought a high-intensity air battle over Tokyo, and still retained sufficient fuel reserves for the return journey. This unprecedented endurance was achieved by combining the P-51D Mustang's internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons with 2 substantial 108-gallon external tanks, expertly managed by the efficient Merlin power plant. The Packard-built Merlin V-1650 engine's remarkable fuel efficiency had engineered a logistical nightmare for the Japanese high command, a fighter possessing a combat radius exceeding 850 miles. This capability defied all prior assumptions about long-range air defense. For Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, diving is key, 84-8, toward the incoming American formation. The reality of this intrusion caused his strategic worldview to crumble. If these fighters could reach Tokyo, he realized, then no corner of the home islands was truly safe. The option to retreat no longer existed. The Americans were not merely present over Tokyo. They were hunting. The lead Mustang pilot, Major Robert W. Moore of the 45th Squadron 15 Fighter Group, immediately spotted Nakamura's key, 84 climbing toward the bomber stream, and banked sharply to initiate an intercept. What ensued was not the hesitant, fuel-conserving defensive engagement that Japanese pilots expected from long-range intruders, but rather an aggressive, predatory display of confidence. Moore's P-51D, despite the 700-mile journey from Iwo Jima, still retained approximately 200 gallons of usable fuel. Utilizing this abundance, he accelerated into a steep power dive, a maneuver suicidal for any conventional escort fighter. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin V-1650-7 engine, delivering 1,695 horsepower underwar emergency power, effortlessly propelled the sleek interceptor past 400 miles per hour in the hunting dive. Nakamura, realizing the impossible had materialized above him, broke hard left and dove desperately for the deck. Behind him, Moore's Mustang followed, its remaining fuel reserves permitting the kind of aggressive, sustained maneuvering that fundamentally defied everything Japanese pilots had been taught about aerial combat logistics. The Imperial Japanese Air Defense Command had no institutional experience with sustained, long-range fighter operations. Now, as American fighters not only reached the airspace over Tokyo, but dominated the capital's skies, possessing hours of fuel remaining, the terrifying truth dawned upon the defenders. The established rules of aerial warfare had fundamentally changed, and the Japanese pilots were the last to realize it. The opening engagement commenced precisely at 0658 hours over the industrial district of Musashino. Within moments, Captain Masao Suenaga, leading his interceptor formation, realized he was battling an apparition. These were aircraft that, according to all operational estimates, should not have been present, performing maneuvers that defied the expected constraints of range and endurance. Their pilots, rather than desperately conserving fuel for the arduous return journey, were instead actively hunting. A sudden, sharp command cut through the radio static. Major Robert W. Moore, leading his P-51 Mustang squadron, signaled his intent. "Blue flight, drop tanks now. We've got company." Suenaga watched in stunned disbelief as the silver American fighters jettisoned their external fuel tanks. This action was not taken because the tanks were empty. Rather, it was a declaration of readiness for a high-G combat, executed with an abundance of fuel still in reserve. "That's impossible," Suenaga whispered into the metallic confines of his oxygen mask. "Those tanks should have been bone dry 50 miles ago." Moore's P-51D, bearing its distinctive call sign, banked sharply and initiated a steep climb towards Suenaga's key, 84-8. The veteran Japanese pilot instinctively turned to meet the attack head-on, a tactic that had reliably served him well against the predictable, fuel-starved American fighters in previous encounters. But as a sleek, silver Mustang closed the distance, the seasoned Japanese pilot, Suenaga, felt a chilling realization. This American was not exhibiting the characteristics of a man concluding a grueling 700-mile endurance run. He was maneuvering with the confidence and precision of a pilot operating from his local airfield. The gap closed rapidly, the two fighters hurtling toward each other at a combined velocity exceeding 700 miles per hour. Suenaga initiated the attack, his twin 12.7mm machine guns and two powerful 20mm cannons spitting fire toward the approaching Mustang. Orange tracers arced violently across the void as Moore retaliated instantly, unleashing a devastating, concentrated burst from his 650 caliber machine guns, each weapon cycling a rate of 850 rounds per minute. At the final moment, both pilots broke. Suenaga sharply to the right, Moore to the left. Standard doctrine for long-range escort pilots demanded extending the engagement to conserve precious fuel reserves. Yet Moore defied expectation, immediately reversing his trajectory into a steep, climbing left turn, pursuing Sanaga with the relentless tenacity of a pilot possessing hours of untapped combat endurance. "This is insane," Sanaga gasped into his radio, pulling a desperate 5G climbing turn to escape the Americans' guns, wrestling with a fundamental question. How much fuel capacity did these foreign aircraft possess? What Sanaga could not know was the strategic advantage held by the P-51D Mustang. It had commenced its mission carrying 400 gallons of fuel, a capacity more than double anything the Japanese pilot had ever witnessed in a single-engine fighter. Even after traversing 675 miles from Iwo Jima, Moore's aircraft retained 200 gallons, sufficient reserves for a full hour of high-intensity dogfighting and the long return flight home. Just 3 miles distant, Lieutenant Akira Watanabe found himself trapped within a vortex of escalating desperation. He was simultaneously engaged by 2 P-51D Mustangs, their coordinated attacks displaying the lethal synchronization born of extensive training and absolute confidence in the aircraft's unprecedented capabilities. His frantic radio transmissions captured the growing panic in the cockpit. These fighters, they're not running. They're not conserving fuel. How is this possible? Unseen by the beleaguered Japanese pilot, Captain John B. Hampshire, leading the second flight of Mustangs from the 506 Fighter Group, heard the question that was now paralyzing the Japanese defense. Speaking to his wingman, Lieutenant Robert Carr, Hampshire's voice carried across the radio frequencies, articulating the new reality. Asterisk, they don't understand, do they? We can stay and fight. We can stay and hunt. We can reach anywhere in their empire and still make a home. Asterisk, the psychological impact on the Japanese pilots was immediate and devastating. The very foundation of their defensive strategy, the assumption that American fighters must turn back at the coastline due to range limitations, was instantly shattered by aircraft performing feats deemed impossible 650 miles from their closest operational base. Watanabe, his key controls damaged by repeated, hammering hits from .50 caliber bullets, compounded his precarious situation with a fatal mistake. Assuming the Americans must be critically low on fuel, he recklessly extended the engagement, attempting to outlast the enemy. Instead, Hampshire's P-51D fly with the calculated confidence of a pilot who knew he had fuel reserves for hours more. The American fighter closes methodically, delivering a decisive burst directly into the heart of the Japanese engine. The Kawasaki Ha-40 explodes violently, venting a geyser of superheated oil and coolant across the fuselage. Ground stations tracking the engagement across Tokyo intercepted the final, bewildered radio transmission from the dying pilot, Watanabe. His words crystallized a grim realization gripping the Japanese command. Asterisk, they are not departing. They have not exhausted their fuel reserves. How? By what means have they reached this place? Asterisk simultaneously. Captain Tomajiro Ogawa, recognized as one of Japan's most seasoned aviators, found himself entangled in a singular, desperate engagement with Major Moore's P-51D Mustang. For 3 minutes, an eternity measured in the high-G environment of aerial combat, the two aircraft executed a deadly ballet above the incinerated remnants of the Nakajima factory. Ogawa's Ki-84 Hate, nominally Japan's most advanced fighter, possessed theoretical advantages over the Mustang in both climb rate and turning radius. Yet, that theoretical edge dissolved instantly against the stark operational reality. Moore flew a machine engineered not just across an ocean, but to arrive over the target with sufficient fuel and ammunition to prosecute the fight with relentless, uncompromising aggression. In a tactical decision that would become a subject of intense scrutiny by aviation historians for decades, Moore deliberately inverted the doctrine of long-range engagement. He sacrificed critical altitude for raw velocity, plunging his Mustang from 15,000 feet down to 8,000 feet. This maneuver consumed precious fuel, a resource any rational long-range pilot will be hoarding meticulously for the return journey. Moore, however, is not focused on the arduous journey home. Instead, he is trading fuel reserves for tactical supremacy, operating with the confidence of a pilot who fully understands his aircraft's unprecedented capabilities. Ogawa, following the steep dive, suddenly realizes he has entered a fatal trap. The P-51's superior high-speed handling characteristics, combined with abundant internal fuel reserves, grant more an aggressive maneuverability that the Japanese pilot, constrained by the shorter range of his Ki-84, cannot possibly match without risking critical fuel starvation. The moment of truth arrives at 8,000 feet. Moore masterfully pulls his P-51 into a sharp, climbing left turn, bringing his synchronized battery of 6.50 caliber machine guns to bear on Ogawa's fighter. A lethal stream of rounds tears instantly through the Japanese aircraft's left wing and fuel tank. As his crippled machine begins its final, irrevocable dive toward the sprawl of Tokyo below, Ogawa's last conscious thought perfectly captures a moment when Japanese air superiority died. If they can come this far, if they can fight this long, we have already lost the war. At precisely 0714 hours, just 16 minutes after the initial contact, the engagement is over. 7 Japanese fighters have been destroyed. Crucially, 2 P-51's sustained damage, yet both successfully completed the 1,350-mile round trip back to Iwo Jima, a distance previously deemed impossible for single-engine fighters. As the Mustangs reform and begin their long journey home, they still carry enough fuel to confirm the dawn of a new, overwhelming strategic reach. Even with sufficient fuel reserves for nearly 3 more hours of flight, the desperate radio communications emanating from Japanese ground control immediately revealed a fundamental revolution in the nature of air warfare. All units report status. Controllers demanded, how many American fighters are still operational? Are they withdrawing to their carriers? The chilling, objective response shattered all tactical assumptions. Control, there are no carriers within 500 miles. The realization dawned. The enemy fighters were operating independently, demonstrating a reach previously unimaginable. This profound shift was captured by Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few Japanese pilots to survive the devastating encounter. He would later commit to his diary the stark terror that day. Today I saw the future of air warfare, and it terrifies me. If the Americans can send fighters anywhere in our empire with fuel to spare, then nowhere is safe. The homeland is no longer protected by distance. The age of American air supremacy over Japan had dawned, carried on the wings of aircraft that fundamentally redefined the limits of operational range. This new, terrifying reality found its physical symbol in the fate of Captain Masao Suenaga. He never returned from that fateful April morning. His sleek Ki-84 Hate fighter was discovered weeks later in a rice field just outside Tokyo. Its fuel tanks were utterly empty, and the pilot lay dead, felled by a single, precise .50 caliber bullet through the heart. The impossible had instantly become routine. American P-51 fighters now owned the skies directly over the Japanese homeland, and the psychological impact of that first very long-range mission tore through the morale of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force like a shockwave. The arrival of American fighters over the home islands represented a seismic shock to the Imperial defense structure. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few survivors of the April 7th engagement, recorded the devastating psychological shift in his diary. We have spent 3 years learning to fight Americans who must turn back at our coastline. Now they come and go as they please with fuel to hunt us like rabbits in our own sky. This sudden vulnerability triggered a fundamental and immediate transformation in Japanese defensive strategy, as the sanctuary of distance, long considered impregnable, instantly vanished. The primary instrument of this strategic upheaval was the American P-51 Mustang, with its revolutionary combat radius reaching 1,650 miles. These single-engine fighters could now strike anywhere in the Japanese Empire and return safely to the forward base of Iwo Jima. The mathematical certainty that had protected Japan's industrial heartland, the belief that no single-engine fighter could cross such vast distances, was utterly obliterated by American engineering genius. The resulting statistics chart Japan's new nightmare. Between April 7 and August 15, 1945, P-51 Mustangs executed 51 very long-range (VLR) missions against the home islands, flying grueling round trips averaging 1,350 miles, distances that would have been considered fantasy just months earlier. American fighters claimed 341 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of only 62 P-51s. But the true devastation wasn't measured in aircraft shot down. It was measured. The introduction of long-range escort fighters directly precipitated the catastrophic collapse of Japanese pilot morale. Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki, a highly decorated veteran who survived the war with 38 aerial victories, later articulated this profound psychological defeat. He recounted the moment the strategic realities shifted, stating, "After April 1945, we stopped believing we could win." The realization was jarring. If the Americans could now dispatch fighters from Iwo Jima to Tokyo with fuel to spare, all previous defensive assumptions were invalidated, leaving them to wonder, where could we hide? This operational reach was a singular achievement of the P-51 Mustang, which delivered a revolution in strategic thinking far beyond a conventional military success. The synergistic combination of the Merlin engine's exceptional fuel efficiency, the Mustang's aerodynamic superiority, and its immense internal fuel capacity fundamentally rewrote the established rules of aerial warfare. Japanese aviators, who had spent years exploiting the restricted range of earlier American fighters, suddenly found themselves systematically outranged, outgunned, and relentlessly hunted above their own sovereign territory. This era of desperation was tragically underscored by the final words of Captain Tamajiro Ogawa, whose Ki-84 fighter crashed into Tokyo Bay. Recorded by ground control, his last transmission was chillingly prophetic. "If they can come this far, we have already lost the war." He was correct. The newfound ability to project fighter power across vast Pacific distances irrevocably shifted the strategic balance, turning Japan's vital aircraft factories, previously protected by geography, into regular targets for precision fighter attacks, emphasizing the increasing desperation of the Japanese defense. By the summer of 1945, the conventional doctrine of the Imperial Japanese Air Force had utterly collapsed. Experienced pilots, such as Warrant Officer Kenji Fujioto, were reduced to desperate measures, attempting to physically ram the formidable B-29 superfortresses. This was not driven by some romanticized notion of samurai honor, but by the stark, practical reality that traditional interception tactics were entirely obsolete against an enemy that possessed unparalleled range and endurance. The advent of the P-51 Mustang fundamentally redefined the parameters of aerial conflict. Its extraordinary range missions remain a seminal case study in military history, illustrating precisely how a single technological breakthrough can irrevocably alter the strategic calculus of warfare. Even today, military analysts meticulously study those seemingly impossible flights, stretching from Iwo Jima to the heart of Tokyo, recognizing them as textbook demonstrations of decisive strategic reach. When the sleek, silver-winged Mustangs first shocked Japanese defenders over the capital on April 7th, they achieved a profound psychological victory. They proved that a potent combination of engineering brilliance and refined tactical innovation could render the impossible inevitable. This strategic shock was perhaps best encapsulated by the final, anguished query attributed to Captain Masao Swanaga. How did they get here? The answer, the mastery of range, speed, and escort capability, did not just win the war, it permanently changed the architecture of military aviation.